Imagine a rainy evening in Geneva, a city known for its neutrality and discretion. A high-ranking Egyptian intelligence chief, a man who survived multiple assassination attempts, believes he is safe within the luxurious walls of a five-star hotel. He is wrong. Within the hour, he will vanish without a trace, extracted by a foreign intelligence service in an operation so audacious it would redefine the rules of covert warfare. This is the story of how Mossad kidnapped the head of Egyptian intelligence, right in the heart of Switzerland. On November 17, 1983, a black Mercedes navigated the rain-slicked streets of Geneva, carrying one of Egypt's most protected individuals. General Mahmoud Safwat had survived 3 assassination attempts, built agent networks across the Middle East, and held secrets capable of destabilizing governments. He believed Switzerland was neutral ground, a place where even enemies observed certain rules. He was mistaken. Within an hour, he would disappear from the Intercontinental Hotel without a trace. Egyptian intelligence would spend the next 48 hours pretending nothing had happened. The Hotel Intercontinental in Geneva stood as a monument to discretion. In its marble lobby, diplomats, arms dealers, and intelligence officers pretended not to recognize one another. November rain streamed down the tall windows as guests moved through the elegant space. Their conversations were muffled by thick carpets and the quiet clink of crystal from the adjacent bar. Outside, the city hummed with its characteristic precision. Swiss punctuality governed everything from trams to street cleaners, who worked even through the downpour. General Mahmoud Safwat arrived at 7:15 p.m., accompanied by 2 bodyguards whose bulk barely allowed them through the revolving door. At 54, the general carried the rigid posture of a career military man, though his custom-tailored civilian suit hinted at someone who had learned to navigate worlds beyond the barracks. His face was broad, marked by thick graying mustaches, and his eyes constantly moved, cataloging exits, studying faces, assessing threats. He had earned this paranoia. As deputy director of Egypt's General Intelligence Directorate, known as the Mukhabarat, Safwat oversaw operations stretching from Libya to Lebanon. He built informant networks in Palestinian refugee camps. He cultivated assets within the intelligence services of rival Arab nations, and most dangerously, maintained ties with Soviet advisors still in Cairo despite Egypt's pivot to the west after the Camp David Accords. The peace treaty with Israel, signed 4 years earlier, had not ended the shadow war between the two nations. Egyptian intelligence continued to monitor Israeli activity across the region. Israeli intelligence returned the attention with equal fervor. Both sides maintained the polite fiction that they were now allies, while their operatives continued to probe for weaknesses, steal secrets, and occasionally eliminate threats. Safwat had come to Geneva for a meeting that officially did not exist. A Syrian intermediary had arranged contact with representatives of a European weapons consortium interested in supplying equipment Egypt could not buy openly. The Americans watched such deals closely, and Cairo had learned to conduct confidential business through neutral channels. Switzerland, with its tradition of banking secrecy and diplomatic discretion, provided the perfect venue. What Safwat did not know was that the meeting had been arranged not by Syrians, but by Mossad, Israel's external intelligence agency. The intermediary who contacted Cairo was an asset who had been feeding information to Tel Aviv for nearly a decade. Every detail of the general's itinerary, from his flight number to his hotel room, had been passed to a team that arrived in Geneva 3 days earlier. The operation was sanctioned at the highest levels. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir personally reviewed the plan, weighing diplomatic repercussions against the intelligence value of what Safwat might reveal. The general was believed to possess detailed knowledge of Egypt's military potential, of Soviet weapon systems still in Egyptian hands, and most crucially, the names and locations of Mukhabarat assets operating inside Israel. This last category had become urgent. Over the previous 18 months, 3 Israeli intelligence operations had been compromised by leaks suggesting high-level penetration. Safwat, Mossad analysts believed, could be the key to identifying the source. The team leader was a man known inside the organization only by the operational name David. At 41, he had spent nearly 2 decades in the field, conducting operations from Beirut to Buenos Aires. His appearance was deliberately unremarkable. average height, chestnut hair graying at the temples, features that could pass for European, Arab, or Latin American depending on context. He spoke 6 languages with varying fluency and possessed a rare ability to remain calm under conditions that would paralyze most people. David arrived in Geneva on November 14, traveling on a Canadian passport, identifying him as a businessman in the telecommunications sector. He checked into a modest hotel near the train station, unpacked a single suitcase containing nondescript clothing, and spent the first 2 days conducting surveillance on the Intercontinental and its surroundings, noting the positions of security cameras, the schedule of porters and cleaners, the traffic patterns on surrounding streets. By the time his team assembled, he knew the terrain as well as any local. The team consisted of 8 operatives. Each had been assigned a specific role. 2 would handle logistics, maintaining vehicles and safe houses. 2 would conduct surveillance, tracking Safwat's movements from the moment he left the airport. 2 would serve as support, ready to intervene if complications arose. And 2 would perform the actual extraction, immobilizing the general and transporting him to a location where interrogation could begin. The extraction specialists were a man and a woman who had worked together on previous operations. Yosef was built like a wrestler, with hands that could crush a trachea or apply a chokehold with equal precision. He had served in an elite military unit before joining Mossad and had participated in operations that remained classified even within the organization. His partner, whom the team called Miriam, seemed his opposite. Slender, elegant, with dark hair styled in a manner hinting at European sophistication. She carried herself like a diplomat's wife or a gallery owner, a woman who attracted attention without looking dangerous. That appearance concealed training in hand-to-hand combat, pharmacology, and the art of appearing precisely where she was not expected. The plan called for intercepting Safwat in his hotel room, where he would be isolated from his bodyguards. Egyptian security protocols required guards to be in the corridor, not inside the room itself, a vulnerability David intended to exploit. The team would gain access to the room through a combination of electronic manipulation and social engineering, immobilize the general with a fast-acting sedative, and transport him through a service entrance to a waiting vehicle. The entire operation, from entry to departure, was planned to take no more than 12 minutes. Preparation was meticulous. Mossad technicians in Tel Aviv constructed a duplicate of the electronic lock system used by the Intercontinental, practicing until they could bypass it in under 30 seconds. They obtained samples of the sedative to be used, testing dosages on volunteers to ensure effectiveness without risking cardiac arrest. They studied floor plans, interviewed former employees, and analyzed the hotel's security protocols until they understood the system better than the guards who ran it. On the afternoon of November 17, the team conducted a final rehearsal in a warehouse on Geneva's outskirts. They constructed a mock-up of the hotel corridor and room, furnished with furniture, arranged according to intelligence photographs. Each operative ran through their role multiple times, anticipating complications and practicing responses. David watched from the side, noting hesitations and suggesting adjustments. By the time they finished, every movement was refined to mechanical precision. The rain began around 5 p.m., a development David welcomed. Pedestrians hurried past with raised umbrellas, paying little attention to vehicles or idle bystanders. Security cameras would capture blurred images through water-streaked lenses. The weather, he reflected, was cooperating with the operation. At 6:45 p.m., the surveillance team reported that Safwat's motorcade had departed the Egyptian diplomatic mission and was heading to the hotel. David acknowledged the transmission and signaled his team to take positions. 2 operatives in a gray Peugeot parked near the hotel's service entrance. 2 more entered the lobby, dressed as European businessmen returning from a late meeting. Yosef and Miriam waited in a room on the 4th floor, 1 level below Safwat's suite, ready to move the moment they received the signal. The general's arrival at the hotel proceeded as expected. His bodyguards scanned the lobby. Their eyes swept over faces with professional suspicion. They noted the 2 businessmen at the bar, but dismissed them as harmless. They did not notice the woman reading a magazine near the elevators, nor the man adjusting his umbrella at a corner entrance. These operatives were trained to seem invisible, and they performed their roles flawlessly. Safwat proceeded to the 5th floor, accompanied by both bodyguards. The elevator doors opened onto a carpeted corridor lit by brass sconces, its walls decorated with reproductions of alpine landscapes. The general walked to room 517, inserted his key card, and entered. One bodyguard took a position outside the door, while the other stationed himself near the elevator lobby. Both assumed the tense posture of men who expected trouble, but did not anticipate it arriving that evening. In the room directly below him, Yosef performed a final check of his equipment. The sedative was loaded into a pneumatic injector, capable of delivering its payload through clothing. The electronic bypass device was tested and confirmed operational. Miriam adjusted her appearance in the mirror, transforming from a surveillance operative into a hotel employee. She wore a uniform obtained through channels David preferred not to discuss, complete with a name badge and the slightly weary expression of someone who had worked a double shift. At 7:42 p.m., David transmitted the signal to proceed. Miriam emerged from the stairwell carrying a tray with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She approached the bodyguard outside Safwat's room with a smile that suggested pleasant fatigue. "Complimentary service from management," she said in French, presenting the tray for Monsieur Hassan. She used the pseudonym under which Safwat had registered, demonstrating knowledge only hotel staff could possess. The bodyguard hesitated. His training warned against unexpected deliveries, but the woman before him showed no signs of threat. Her hands were visible, occupied with the tray. Her uniform was authentic, and the wine, a respectable Bordeaux, was precisely the gesture a luxury hotel might extend to a valued guest. He knocked on the door and spoke briefly with Safwat in Arabic. A moment later, the door opened. The general stood in the doorway, dressed in a hotel robe. His face showed mild irritation at the interruption. He was preparing for his meeting, scheduled for 9 p.m. in a private dining room. The wine, he presumed, was the hotel's attempt to impress a guest whose booking had been made through diplomatic channels. Miriam stepped inside, placing the tray on a table near the window. As Safwat turned to close the door, she moved with practiced efficiency. Her left hand extracted the pneumatic injector from beneath the tray's napkin. Her right hand seized Safwat's wrist, throwing him off balance. Before he could cry out, the injector pressed against his neck and delivered its payload. The sedative took effect within seconds. Safwat's legs buckled. His eyes rolled back as consciousness left him. Miriam caught him before he could fall, lowering him to the carpet with the care of a nurse tending a patient. The entire sequence took less than 8 seconds. In the corridor, Yosef emerged from the stairwell behind the bodyguard. The man sensed movement and began to turn. His hand reached for the weapon under his jacket. He never completed the motion. Yosef's arm encircled his throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery with precisely calibrated force. Within 5 seconds, the bodyguard was unconscious. Yosef lowered him to the floor and dragged him into the room, where Miriam was already securing Safwat's wrists with plastic ties. The second bodyguard, near the elevator, presented a more complex problem. He had heard nothing, seen nothing, but his training required periodic visual confirmation of his colleague's position. When he turned and found the corridor empty, his hand immediately went to his weapon. He never drew it. 2 operatives who had waited in the lobby came up the service staircase. They emerged behind him. One applied a chokehold while the other administered a sedative injection. The bodyguard struggled briefly before losing consciousness. They carried him into the room, adding him to the collection of unconscious men. David's voice crackled in their earpieces. "Package secured, 3 subjects neutralized. Proceeding with extraction," Miriam responded. The team moved with choreographic precision. Safwat was placed in a laundry cart taken from a cleaner's closet, covered with sheets that concealed his bound form. The bodyguards were positioned in the bathroom, where they would not be discovered until morning. The wine bottle and glasses were wiped clean and left on the table, suggesting the general had enjoyed a drink before bed. Yosef pushed the cart toward the service elevator. His uniform identified him as maintenance staff, responding to a plumbing emergency. Miriam walked ahead, clearing the path and ensuring no witnesses complicated the extraction. They descended to the basement level, where a service door opened onto a loading platform hidden from the main street. The gray Peugeot waited, its engine running. Within 90 seconds, Safwat was transferred from the cart to the vehicle's trunk, which had been outfitted with padding and ventilation to ensure his survival during transport. The cart was abandoned in a storage closet, where it could remain unnoticed for days. By the time the elevator doors closed, no visible trace of the operation remained. David watched the Peugeot's departure from his vantage point across the street, then walked calmly to the train station. His role in the operation was complete. The interrogation phase would be handled by specialists already waiting at a safe house in the French countryside, just across the border. He would return to Tel Aviv on a commercial flight the next morning, traveling on a different passport than the one he had used to enter Switzerland. The drive to the safe house took approximately 2 hours, following a route that avoided major highways and border checkpoints. The crossing into France was made via a rural road local smugglers had used for generations, its existence unknown to authorities on either side. By midnight, Safwat was installed in a basement room, equipped with medical monitoring equipment and soundproofing that ensured total isolation. He was slowly regaining consciousness. The sedative released its grip in stages. His first awareness was of discomfort. His wrists were bound to the arms of a metal chair. His ankles were secured to its legs. The room was illuminated by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows on concrete walls devoid of any decoration. He still wore the hotel robe, a detail that somehow made his situation feel more humiliating. A man sat opposite him, positioned just outside the light. Safwat could make out the general outline of the figure, but features remained hidden. When the man spoke, his Arabic carried the accent of someone who had studied the language academically, not as a native. "General Safwat," the voice said, "welcome. I apologize for the conditions." Safwat tested his restraints, found them unyielding, and forced himself to remain calm. His training had prepared him for this possibility, though he had never truly believed it would happen. Egyptian intelligence officers were not supposed to be kidnapped from neutral countries. There were protocols, understandings between services, rules that even enemies observed. "You are making a serious mistake," he said. His voice was firm despite the fear coiling in his stomach. "Egypt will not allow this." The figure in the shadows shifted slightly. "Egypt will not acknowledge that anything happened. Your government cannot admit that one of its senior intelligence officers was taken from a hotel in Geneva. The diplomatic embarrassment would be intolerable. They will claim you defected, or perhaps that you never existed at all." The interrogation that followed would last 11 days. The methods used were sophisticated, combining psychological pressure with carefully calibrated physical discomfort. Sleep deprivation was the primary tool, supplemented by temperature manipulation and constant uncertainty about what would happen next. Safwat was allowed to eat and drink, but never on a predictable schedule. He was permitted to rest, but never for more than an hour at a time. The questioning continued in shifts, with different interrogators appearing at random intervals to ask the same questions from different angles. The interrogators sought specific information. They wanted the names of Mukhabarat assets operating in Israel, particularly those who might have penetrated Israeli intelligence or military circles. They wanted details on Egypt's military potential, forced dispositions, and contingency plans for various scenarios. They wanted information on Soviet weapon systems that remained in Egyptian arsenals, their maintenance status and operational readiness. And they wanted to understand the relationship between Egyptian intelligence and other Arab services, particularly those of Syria, Iraq, and Libya. Safwat initially resisted, providing only his name, rank, and the assertion that his captivity violated international law. The interrogators listened patiently, acknowledged his position, and continued their work. They showed him photographs of his family not as threats, but as reminders of what he stood to lose. They played recordings of intercepted communications that demonstrated the depth of Israeli intelligence penetration. They offered him water, coffee, and eventually food that exceeded what he might have received in a military prison. The breakthrough came on the 6th day, when fatigue and isolation had eroded his psychological defenses. One of the interrogators, a woman whose gentle manner contrasted with the harshness of the environment, began asking about a specific operation Safwat believed only a handful of Egyptian officials knew about. The operation involved placing an asset inside the Israeli defense establishment, someone who had been feeding information to Cairo for nearly 3 years. When the interrogator mentioned this asset's code name, Safwat realized resistance was futile. The Israelis already knew more than he could have imagined. His silence would protect no one. His continued defiance would only prolong his suffering without serving any purpose. Over the following days, he provided information that would reshape Israeli counterintelligence operations for years to come. He revealed the identity of the penetration agent, a clerical worker in the Ministry of Defense who had been passing documents through a complex chain of intermediaries. He detailed Egyptian surveillance operations targeting Israeli diplomatic facilities across Europe and the Middle East. He explained the structure of Mukhabarat networks in Palestinian refugee camps, identifying key assets and communication protocols. The interrogators recorded everything, cross-checking details against existing intelligence and demanding clarification when his answers seemed incomplete. They treated him with professional courtesy, never resorting to the brutality he had expected. This approach, he later reflected, was more effective than violence would have been. They broke him not with pain, but with the systematic demonstration that his secrets were already compromised. On the 11th day, they informed him the interrogation was complete. He would be released, they explained, through a channel that would allow both sides to maintain their preferred narratives. Egypt would take him back without acknowledging anything unusual had occurred. Israel would retain the intelligence he had provided without revealing how it was obtained. The shadow war would continue as before, with one significant difference. Cairo would know its most senior intelligence officers could be taken at will, and that knowledge would influence Egyptian operations for years. The release was arranged through intermediaries in Cyprus, a location chosen for its accessibility and tradition of hosting confidential exchanges between adversarial parties. Safwat was driven to Geneva Airport, where he boarded a commercial flight to Larnaca under the watch of Mossad operatives, who ensured his departure without incident. In Cyprus, Egyptian officials collected him from a hotel near the waterfront, asking no questions about where he had been or what had happened. Egypt's official response was silence. No diplomatic protests were filed, no public statements issued. The intelligence services of both nations continued their work as if the incident had never occurred. Within Egypt, Safwat was quietly retired. His career ended not in disgrace, but in the ambiguous category of officers removed from sensitive posts for unspecified reasons. He lived out his remaining years in Cairo, avoided by former colleagues and watched by security services that never fully trusted him. For Mossad, the operation was considered a significant success. The intelligence obtained from Safwat led to the identification and neutralization of the penetration agent in the Ministry of Defense, closing the leak that had compromised numerous operations. The methods used in Geneva, particularly the combination of technical surveillance and human manipulation, were refined and applied to subsequent missions. The willingness to conduct an extraction in a neutral country demonstrated capabilities that influenced the calculations of rival services for decades. Diplomatic repercussions were minimal. As David had predicted, Switzerland filed no formal complaints, having no evidence anything illicit had occurred on its territory. Egypt could not acknowledge the incident without admitting its intelligence services had been penetrated and its senior officer kidnapped. Israel maintained its silence, adding the operation to the classified files documenting its covert capabilities. Yet within the intelligence community, rumors spread through unofficial channels. The story of how Mossad took an Egyptian general from a Geneva hotel became part of the mythology surrounding Israeli intelligence, a reminder that even the most protected individuals could be reached when circumstances demanded. Other services studied the operation, some with admiration, others with unease, understanding that the rules of the shadow war had shifted slightly. The team that carried out the extraction dispersed to other assignments. David continued his career, rising to senior positions before retiring in the late 1990s. Yosef and Miriam worked together on subsequent operations, their partnership becoming legendary within the organization. The support operatives moved through the invisible bureaucracy of intelligence work, their contributions known only to those with appropriate clearances. The safe house in France was sanitized and abandoned. Its basement room was restored to an innocent state that revealed nothing of what had transpired there. The vehicles used in the operation were sold or destroyed. Documents and recordings from the interrogation were transported to Tel Aviv, where analysts extracted every fragment of useful information before consigning the originals to archives that would remain classified for a generation. General Mahmoud Safwat died in 1997. His passing was briefly noted in Egyptian newspapers, which described him as a retired military officer, making no mention of his intelligence career. His family received a pension commensurate with his rank and years of service. His colleagues attended the funeral, which was modest by Egyptian military standards, their presence a gesture of respect to a man whose greatest significance could never be publicly acknowledged. The rain that fell in Geneva that November evening had long since evaporated, leaving no trace on the streets where the operation unfolded. The Hotel Intercontinental continued to host diplomats and businessmen who never suspected what had happened in room 517. The service corridors and loading platforms that facilitated the extraction were used daily by staff who knew nothing of their role in history. In Tel Aviv, the files on Operation Geneva remained in a secure vault, accessible only to those with the highest clearances. Occasionally, senior officers retrieved them for training purposes, using the operation as a case study in planning, execution, and managing diplomatic fallout. New recruits studied the details, absorbing lessons that could not be taught in any academic setting. The shadow war between nations continued. It was waged by men and women whose names would never appear in history books. They operated in the spaces between official reality and hidden truth, conducting operations their governments would neither confirm nor deny. The extraction of General Safwat was just one episode in this endless conflict, notable for its audacity, but ultimately one of many. What distinguished the operation was not its complexity or ruthlessness, but its demonstration of a fundamental truth about intelligence work. In the realm of espionage, no neutral territory existed. There were no safe havens, no guarantees, no rules that could not be broken when the stakes were sufficiently high. The general had believed himself protected by diplomatic convention and geographic distance. He believed certain boundaries would be respected. That trust was his vulnerability, and Mossad exploited it with clinical precision. The lesson was not lost on other intelligence services. In subsequent years, senior officers traveling abroad took additional precautions, altering their habits, expanding their security details, avoiding hotels where their movements could be predicted. These measures provided some protection, but they could not eliminate the fundamental vulnerability the Geneva operation had exposed. In a world where technology enabled surveillance and communication in ways previous generations could not have imagined, no one was truly unreachable. For those who participated in the operation, memories remained vivid even decades later. The tension of the final approach, the precision of the extraction, the long drive through rain-soaked countryside to the French border. These moments defined their careers, establishing a reputation that would follow them through subsequent assignments. They proved that Mossad could operate anywhere, against any target, with consequences the international community would be forced to accept. The operation also demonstrated something about the nature of intelligence work that outsiders rarely understood. Success was measured not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet achievements that left no visible trace. The best operations were those that never made headlines, that remained classified for a generation, that achieved their objectives without alerting the world to what had happened. By that standard, Geneva was exemplary. The rain had stopped by the time David reached the train station that evening, but the streets remained slick with moisture that reflected the lights of passing cars. He bought a ticket to Zurich, where he would spend the night before catching his flight to Tel Aviv. The platform was nearly empty at that hour, occupied only by a few travelers who paid no attention to the unremarkable man in a gray coat. As the train pulled away from Geneva, David allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The operation had proceeded exactly to plan, with no casualties and no complications. The general was in custody, the team was dispersing, and the intelligence that would justify the entire enterprise was already being extracted. By the time the sun rose, Safwat would begin his long journey through revelation and capitulation. The Swiss countryside slid past the window. Its darkness was broken only by occasional clusters of light marking village farms. David watched without seeing, his mind already turning to the next operation, the next target, the next invisible war that would be waged in the shadows while the world went about its business, unaware. This was his life. It had been his life for 2 decades, and he could imagine no other. In the basement room across the border, General Safwat was beginning to understand that his world had changed forever. The questions that would ultimately break his resistance had not yet begun, but their inevitability was already apparent. He was alone, isolated, cut off from every support system he had spent his career building. The empire of secrets he had constructed was about to be dismantled piece by people who asked patient questions and never raised their voices. Operation Geneva remained classified for decades. Its details are known only to those who participated and the senior officials who sanctioned it. No diplomatic protests were ever filed. No newspaper ever reported what happened. General Safwat lived out his remaining years in quiet obscurity, and the secrets he revealed continued to influence Israeli intelligence long after the Cold War ended. In the world of espionage, the most significant events are often those that leave no trace at all. What are your thoughts on the boundaries of intelligence operations? Should national security justify actions beyond borders? Share your perspective in the comments below, and if you found this account of covert history compelling, please like this video, subscribe for more, and share it with others interested in the unseen conflicts that shape our world. Like this video, subscribe for more, and share it with others interested in the unseen conflicts that shape our world.